22. Rodin was up at first light, feeling refreshed, barely recalling the brief terrors his mind had played in the night. He couldn't even remember which image had silenced them. He packed his belongings and headed down, leaving through the back door. There was no need to say farewell to Gal, the man was probably still sleeping anyway. Rodin walked away, enjoying the early morning coolness. It had rained sometime during the night, and the streets almost glistened. Rodin brought to mind the maps he had studied, and all he knew of the borders. There was not much definite information, but Rodin could read between the lines. He used his instinct, placing himself in the controller's shoes. They'd want somewhere out of the way, but nowhere too dangerous. Somewhere with a semblance of civilization. He started heading north. That was where Sharoff was, and that was where Ratch had been seen heading. It was where Rodin must go. Rodin felt uneasy about heading in this direction. It wasn't fear so much as trepidation. A general sense that he should stay away. Yes, there were all the stories, but there were stories about every place. There were those who thought de Floren's district was dangerous, simply because the main man never showed his face. There were those who told tales of death and mutilation in the streets of Jenna's district. There would have been tales warning the unwary away from the black dog. All the stories had a genesis. The pub, Rodin was sure, had been the setting for violence either inside or in the vicinity. It was not unreasonable to assume that someone had died in the room Rodin had slept in. Every area had its stories, but that didn't make them too dangerous. He felt safe in Jenna's district. He could be relaxed on the streets run by de Floren. And even in the bar, he had felt no threats. So why should the North be any different? Rodin could fight. He could look after himself. If he stayed alert, he could cope with whatever he met. Rodin breathed heavily, aware of the smells of cooking. Somewhere nearby, a breakfast was being prepared. He needed to stop soon. Food would be good. He turned, following his nose. Up above, a window was open, and he could hear sounds of pans and cutlery, voices calling for food, expletives offered in return. He wouldn't get food there. Private rooms. He needed a cafe. Somewhere he could sit, watch the world go by for a few moments and tuck into something filling. It didn't necessarily have to be tasty, as long as it filled a hole and gave him the energy he needed. And a drink, something to counter the beer of last night. Strong coffee, he thought, maybe with sugar, take the edge off. He shook his head. He knew what he was doing. Avoiding thinking. He couldn't afford to lose control again, not like he had with Sporif. He could recall everything about the fight with the man's thugs. He could feel, in his muscles memory, how he had moved. He could bring back the force he had exerted, and the way he had twisted. He could bring to mind the sharp intake of breath the woman had made as she stumbled. He could smell mint on the bulky man's breath. But with Sporif there was a gaping hole. He could recall lifting his boot. The banister was in one hand, and the wood was rough through age. He could feel his leg descending, no, flying down. He could bring back that first jolt running up through his thigh. But after that there was nothing until he found himself taking in air, leaning over, one hand resting on his left knee, and looking down to the mutilation he had caused. If anyone had appeared during that time, Rodin would have been unaware. If anyone had shouted, he would not have heard. And that scared him. He had lost himself totally. Only for a few minutes, or maybe even less. But it was enough. He could not afford to lose himself like that. Ever. He turned from the open window, the voices and aromas fading away. He concentrated, feeling each footstep, keeping his pace steady. And scanning everything. Rodin realized the man had been following him for some time. He was tall, wearing a woolen hat pulled tight on his head. He wore a black jacket and trousers, bulky enough to conceal weapons, making it impossible to tell his body build. He kept his eyes down, but his face was set straight. Rodin sensed trouble. He searched his memories, and knew the man had been following him all morning. He had been waiting in the alley outside the Black Dog. Rodin carried on for another 10 minutes, slowing slightly, giving the man time to close the gap. He was walking amongst residential buildings about 4 stories high, in some state of disrepair. Rodin imagined the rents to be low, and the turnover of occupants high. A place to hole up while seeking something better. Down the side of each building was an alley, with accumulations of rubbish. Some of these alleys were blocked by fencing, while others continued to a road further on. But they also provided emergency exits for the buildings. There were old metal staircases from the first floor up. The railings looked stained, possibly rusty. From the alley floor to the first flight would need a ladder. There was one on each staircase, held aloft, easy to free when coming down but hard to access from the ground. Rodin had slowed considerably, and the man was closer. Crossing a street, Rodin glanced behind and caught the man's face. He saw stubble and piercing eyes. A sharp nose. He had been in the bar. The man by the door, seemingly engrossed in his screen. Think back. Run through everything from the moment the door opened. The assault of the music. The thick atmosphere. Walking across to the bar, already taking in the sights. The man had been in the bar already. As Rodin entered, he had looked up, as did everyone else. They'd all been assessing the stranger, deciding if he were a threat, someone to ignore, or a target. But the man by the door had looked back to his screen almost instantly. He had recognized Rodin. He didn't need to take a deeper look. Rodin was being trailed. He turned into the next alley. Once round the corner he sprinted and sprung, twisting his body as he did so. Reaching, he pulled himself up. He watched, hidden in the metal staircase, as the man rounded the corner. The alley had a fence running across the middle. Piled against this were boxes and rubbish, reaching to a height of about 8 feet. High enough that there was a chance of scaling the fence using the rubbish as steps. The man headed for this barrier, no doubt considering that Rodin had done just this. As the man tested some of the boxes, finding a few that gave way as soon as he put his weight on them, Rodin eased himself down soundlessly, dropping with bent legs. He straightened and walked carefully to the man. The lance was at the man's neck in a heartbeat. Rodin's other arm reached round, pulling the man back, off-balancing him. Looking for something? There was no response. Rodin could make out the side of the man's face and saw a brief look of shock. He rested his finger on the button. You know what a lance is, I'm sure. But you don't know what I've loaded it with. I suggest you talk. Rodin was dragging the man back, making sure he couldn't find his feet. This would only last so long, and the man was still not talking. Why were you following me? The man's lips were still firm. He was stubborn, and Rodin admired that. But he needed answers. He kicked out, folding the man's legs. As the man's weight dropped onto Rodin, he lowered himself in one fast, smooth movement. The man sat, legs out in front, with Rodin crouched at his back, holding him firm. Still with the lance in the man's neck. Why? Rodin had lowered his voice to a whisper, and spoke directly into the man's ear. He could see hairs sprouting within. The man was getting on in years.
Money.
One word, but it was spoken quietly. He was lying. Rodin waited, and more came.
You paid well at the Black Dog, so I figured you had money. Thought I might convince you to share some of it.
There was almost a sneer in that last sentence. The man was scared, but he was hiding it well. He had been in situations similar to this before. You think that's going to happen? A twitch. The man wanted to move his head.
Guess not.
But you usually get things your way.
Usually.
The way the man stressed the word, Rodin knew he rarely failed. His first honest answer. I don't want you following me. Rodin saw the man tense as the liquid left the lance, saw the eyes widen for a second. He dragged the man to the wall, propping him up so he could sit without support. It's Corillax. He saw recognition in the man's face. He pulled out a blade. You know there's nothing you can do. But I might be lenient. If you talk. Why were you following me?
Told you. Money.
Rodin shook his head and reached his free hand out. The man's expression changed, and Rodin knew he was trying to pull his body back. Useless but an understandable reaction. Rodin reached into the man's jacket, quickly checking. He pulled out a couple of blades, and felt at least one more in the lining. Then he found the screen. Anything good on here? You seemed pretty interested in it last night. In the Black Dog. He waited.
Okay.
The word came out almost too quiet to hear, as if it were not for Rodin. As if he were reaching a decision.
I'll talk. But on one condition.
Impressive. Rodin held the advantage, but still the man was looking to deal. Rodin felt something like pride. Whoever was after him had sent someone good. Rodin twisted the blade in his hand. The surface was smooth, and the light hit the metal, reflecting the surroundings. There was nobody else around. They were far enough into the alley that a passer-by would not see them. There was no sign of life behind any of the windows overlooking the alley. What condition?
My life. I talk, and you leave me here to let the drug wear off.
And then you carry on following me. A pause, and Rodin knew the man was trying to shake his head.
No. No point. You'd spot me.
I don't relish killing those who are good at what they do. But I'm not going to agree to your condition. I might let you live, or I might decide you're too much of a threat. Depends on what you tell me. The man was in no condition to make deals, and Rodin wasn't interested. He wanted information. The man sighed.
Fair enough. I was following you. I had instructions. I heard you talking to others, and noticed your interest when they mentioned the Black Dog. Thought I'd wait for you there.
Makes sense. What were your instructions?
Follow and watch. Report back.
Who to?
No name. I had an address to send daily reports, more if needed.
But your initial contact?
Some woman. Pretty sure she was working for someone else. She didn't give her name or his.
His. A pause. The man had said more than he meant to.
Yeah. When she talked of whoever the information was for, she said him. You know, like, he wants to be informed the minute anything happens. Suppose it could have been a front, but I don't think so.
So where did you start? What district?
Diff Lauren.
The old man or Malice? The son seemed most likely. Was he checking up, or was this connected with Malice's helping hand? How much did Malice know? Too many questions, no way of getting answers. Rodin stood. You know what to expect with Corillax. For the next couple of hours, you're going to be conscious, but you're not going to be able to do a thing. Whoever comes into this alley will be able to do whatever they want. He looked to the end of the alley, knowing the man was also casting his eyes that way. Rodin knew what was going through the man's mind. I don't think you can easily be seen by anyone out there, but let's make sure. He walked over to the pile of rubbish and pulled a few boxes and bags free. These he threw over the man. Then he placed more to one side, shielding him from view. You should be safe now. Best enjoy your rest. The man had been right. If he carried on following, Rodin would spot him. If that happened, the man would be dead. If he stayed quiet, he might live. Rodin walked from the alley.